Hi everyone, welcome to PriorityZero, a lead dev engineering leadership podcast. I'm your host today, Scott Carey, and I'm joined by Katerina Iliakopoulou. Katerina, thank you so much for joining us today here in London. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am a senior machine learning engineer at Meta currently. I'm originally from Greece, but I live in New York.
How long have you been in New York for?
It's going to be 10 years this July.
Nice.
So New York is home now.
Did you study there?
Yes, I did my master's in New York. That's how I moved there. I did a dual master's degree in journalism and computer science at Columbia.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. So at what point did you realize that you were more interested in pursuing the software engineering side of it than the journalism side, or was that always the plan?
Well, I did, my bachelor's was in electrical and computer engineering, which was a 5-year-long degree that I did in Greece. During that time, I became really interested in software engineering, machine learning. And after I graduated, I wasn't sure where I wanted to work. I was hired as a research assistant in a research institute in Greece, and I got involved in a project that was about viral news detection, and it was a tool for journalists, essentially. So that actually, that was really interesting to me. And then I started thinking about, journalism, AI, engineering, and I found the dual master's degree at Columbia University in New York. I decided to apply. I got a scholarship. I didn't think I was going to get it. So then I won in a lifetime opportunity. So I moved to New York and then I stayed there.
That's great because we're going to get into that when we start talking about your current PriorityZero, because I'm so interested by that through line of viral news detections and now the work that you do with machine learning at Meta. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit more about how important you think it is as an engineer to understand your domain that deeply, because I don't think that's that common a thing. I think it's really interesting that you thought deeply about, I want to think about information discovery as an engineer, so I'm going to do this dual masters in journalism. I don't think a lot of people think about it that deeply. I think they become a software engineer and then land a job somewhere and then pick up the domain. So how important do you think that kind of deep domain knowledge is to being a good engineer?
I think it's very important. I mean, you have to be passionate about what you're working on. And of course, having strong engineering skills, computer science skills is very important to be good at your job. But the other half of it is also being really good at the domain knowledge you acquire when you do your job. And that's really hard to do when you're not passionate about the domain you work in. So, for me, it was a no-brainer. I couldn't imagine myself working as a software engineer or machine learning engineer in different domains that were completely unrelated. I always wanted to work in tech, but on things that were related to information consumption, information retrieval. So that's why I decided to go that path.
Great. And then maybe I'm jumping a few steps here, but you eventually got to live that dream, really. You ended up at the New York Times. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you did there?
Yeah, I actually started at the New York Times as an intern. So while I was doing the dual master's degree, I applied for an internship there. And being at Columbia at that time, the New York Times was always the dream job for everybody. And I was, I was an intern for about 2-3 months, and I worked in what they called data universe team. And we basically collected data and created the pipelines and surfaced the data to a dashboard for journalists to understand how their story is consumed by readers. After the internship, I got a full-time offer, and I started in their personalization team, which was responsible for how we personalize content on the apps, either the website or the mobile app. And I worked in personalization for about 2.5 years at the Times, and then I switched and I became the tech lead for their in-house messaging platform, which was basically the platform that we had for all newsroom newsletters and push notifications. And then afterwards I worked a little bit closer with the newsroom, and then I made the jump to Meta.
That must have been a hard job to leave. That sounds like such a great job. What was it about Meta that made you want to make that switch?
Well, I think it was because I wanted to go work somewhere where, they really invested in machine learning and like learn state-of-the-art machine learning, work on cutting-edge technologies. Also, at that time, when I got hired on Meta, I actually got hired in their the news tab team. So I went there with a prospect to work again in news. Of course, like a year after I was there, you might know that they deprioritized news. So now I'm working on machine learning projects primarily, but like the products I'm working for is Facebook. And sometimes like I could have some partnerships with Instagram, but yeah, I'm working more in machine learning models and like pure machine learning solutions rather than something that's, just the actual product, the end product.
And was that a big kind of domain change going from kind of news, which is quite specific, to just content discovery as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, and I struggled a little bit with it because in my mind, being for 5 years at the Times and then switching to go work again for news, but for a bigger platform, I was like, I don't know if this is the right path. Like I want to stay in news, but then I thought about it because, information is it's not just about what we consume in news. It's, like social media information is basically how we consume like most of our information nowadays. And I think it's really important when we think about how we prioritize the content that each one of us sees. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting problem to solve. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it still.
I think people really like to talk about that being a real generational shift. And I think that I'll be really interested to see what you think about this, because the way that younger generations consume news content feels like it's changed a great deal. And I don't think they predominantly pick up the New York Times or read it on their app. They consume it, in dribs and drabs across platforms. Is that what you're seeing at Facebook? And then is it part of your job to make sure that they're getting the stuff that's most relevant to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not my job to look necessarily like at different cohorts and how they consume information. But I mean, just looking at, generally speaking, like stats, like from, Pew Research and like other centers that like actually conduct surveys and interviews to understand how people consume information, you see that there is a shift, and like people don't really go to a specific outlet, but they want to have like they are going more to social media platforms, either like Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok now a lot too. And this is where they, get most of news or like entertainment content. And that's why I think it's important that news outlets and media outlets in general, like they should think about how they can communicate their content more on different platforms, and not just expect that people will have to come to their site, their website or their app. They have to be more proactive about it.
Yeah. And kind of switching gears a little bit. So you're a senior software engineer at Meta. Have you kind of consciously decided to stay down the IC track at the moment rather than going down the management track? How do you see your career playing out for the next couple of years?
Yeah, so when I was at the Times, I got the opportunity to switch to management at some point, but yeah, I decided I didn't want to. The reason was, between that, and I was a staff engineer at the time, so I was basically, a tech lead leading cross-functional projects. I wanted to stay close to the execution, I think, and I wasn't. I really respect good management. I think there's real value to it, but I wanted to be closer to the work. When I went to Meta, I got hired as a machine learning engineer there. So, and it's much harder to transition to management over at Meta because you really need to be. It's a bigger organization. You need to be like more of an expert in the different domains, like to be able to effectively lead teams. But, I've had obviously over the years, like different types of managers. And as I said, I have a real respect for good managers, and I've come to appreciate, how a good manager can really scale a team and the work. So, I've been an IC, an individual contributor for like almost 10 years now. I think maybe at some point I will consider management because I think having all those examples, maybe I can bring some value to the table as a manager. But yeah, so far I've been really excited about the work. So I decided to, stay in the IC track and, contribute there more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned you really value good managers. So what makes a great manager for you?
A great manager is somebody who really listens to you and doesn't see you as somebody who will help them accomplish their goals. I think it's like they view their relationship with you as a real partnership, and they want to basically help you grow throughout the process. They are invested in your goals and your aspirations, and they help you when you are in a time where you can't really be there 100%. So you feel comfortable. Okay, maybe now it's not like a good time for me, but that won't affect really my performance or like how people view me in the team. They support you. So yeah, I guess because I'm going all over the place now, it would be like a good manager listens, supports, provides opportunities for growth, and basically really values the different strengths that people in their team bring, and they don't expect that everybody should fit one shape and form, but everybody brings their own uniqueness, and when combined, this is what moves the team forward.
Perfect. And then you spent quite a long time in academia by the sounds of it, and it sounds like you've kind of taken that approach through to your career now. You were talking about how kind of progression at Meta looks like deep expertise in areas, and obviously in machine learning there's just like a plethora of information and new ways of doing things all the time. Is that right? Have you continued to take quite an academic approach to kind of building that expertise, or do you do more of it kind of on the ground by doing?
Yeah, I think like at Meta, I definitely had to take a step back and go back to my academia roots, and because basically my role at Meta requires me to read research papers, and the thing is that sometimes as engineers we are like more inclined to execute and show results, but at Meta I really had to reprogram myself in that aspect, because you need to basically convince people why you're working on certain things, because it's also like the culture of the company is not so much top down. I mean, obviously we have directives from leadership about where we are going and where we should what metrics we should optimize, what is our goals, but we are the ones, the engineers are the ones who basically say, okay, this is the solution that I am choosing to implement this, to solve for this. So when you're proposing this, you have to convince people why your idea is good. And this requires actually looking at the data, forming a solid hypothesis, and making a good argument why this is better than the other and why people should join you in actually developing this. So yeah, this actually, took me back to how can I really gather data and describe in a really good way, even before we start implementing, why this is a good plan and, why this is the case.
It makes me think that humanities aren't wasted effort, because that's what you learn in humanities. It's how to build an argument, back it with data, and convince people of that. And obviously this podcast is called PriorityZero. And what you're really talking about is, reprioritizing, trying to put things on the roadmap, trying to kind of convince others that your priority is their priority. Mm-hmm. How do you start to do that in your role at Meta? How do you start to show that impact to try and kind of change hearts and minds?
Oh, well, when you said about priorities, actually, at Meta, when I joined, the first thing they tell you is you will be consumed by so many things, so much information that you really have to prioritize, And there are so many different things, and people can also ask of you of different things that can really distract you. I think, and it's a very impact-oriented company. So you really have to show not just that you built something, but actually that something that you built had impact. So I think it starts with, again, going back to what I was saying before, looking at the data and making sure that you are moving towards the right track, towards the right goals, and have as much of confidence by seeing at what others have done in the past, have tried, and like what correlations are there, what can I derive from the data, that the idea you're proposing, the solution you're proposing is sound and it's going to create impact. And I think the second part is, once you kind of like show that, I think the other part is that you really have to make people invested in your solution. And I think what I have personally found is that the way to do that is to basically make them, a real partner, having them share credit in what you're building. It's not just you, because maybe it's my idea. It's not like, oh, I'm leading this idea, so, I'm the captain here. No, it's more like, hey, I have this cool thing that I want to build. Can you help me? What ideas can you bring to make this idea better? And that creates co-ownership, and people then get invested and actually want to really work with you and help you to build this together. So yeah, I found this to be really, really important, especially when you have this bottom-up approach in the organization.
Yeah, that's great. That's really useful. And you've mentioned impact a couple of times. Like, how do you start to show that? Is it consistent, or does it depend on the case at hand? Like, because I would assume that things like customer response or kind of the data that you're seeing from users is really important. But if it's something that you haven't been able to put in front of users yet, how do you start to demonstrate that impact and convince people it's the right thing to be working on?
Well, that's tricky. Yeah. I mean, I haven't worked on things that are not, that don't face real users. So to some extent, even if you haven't launched something to real users yet, we still have feedback loops where we internally give feedback. And this is kind of like a quick way to validate your hypothesis. I think the other way is to create some evaluation tools, which are quick things to build, and then you can somehow simulate the environment and understand, okay, if this is what I'm building, this roughly how it's going to work, let me validate it again, data, an offline pipeline, an offline tool, and we evaluate that roughly this is the behavior we expect. And then we can, you have to be ready to basically change directions. If you get a signal that actually what I'm building is not good, you can't be tied to that solution just because you worked on it for a month. Because guess what? If you keep working on it for the next 5 months, and then, you have nothing to show by the end of the half of the year, it's going to be worse. So I think, it's quick prototyping, validating, checking if there's an impact, and then being ready to change directions if necessary.
Don't have strongly held assumptions.
Yeah.
And we've been talking kind of quite broadly about how you go about your work, but we haven't talked about your actual PriorityZero. So what's the one thing that's really consuming your time at the moment? What's the one thing that if you had to drop everything else, you'd be really working towards?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this half, I have been working on building a machine learning model that was adopted by Facebook Reels. So let me take a step back. I work in a team that's horizontal, in the organization is horizontal. So we build machine learning solutions that are used by different product teams. And the way we work is that we look at state-of-the-art research, and we basically decide that, which fits our priorities, what serves the goals that we are trying to hit. And then we decide on a solution, we implement it again, as I said, really quick. And then if we see that it's moving towards a positive direction, we invest more in it. So this half, I started working with my team on this machine learning solution, which got adopted by Facebook Reels. And the idea now is that how can other teams adopt it? How can we scale this solution? And how can we improve it more? So
could you explain Reels for people who maybe don't know what Facebook Reels are?
Yeah, Facebook Reels are short videos that we have now on Facebook. They're also, on Instagram Reels, and you also find them on other social media platforms. My P0, my PriorityZero right now is to basically look at what other teams have done, understand basically from what other product teams are thinking, what is their PriorityZero, and how could we, what we have built fit in their goals, serve what they are working on. And then basically at the same time gather, more like other data, other solutions, like, read more papers, see how we could iterate on the solution, and then communicate that through briefs, like where basically people can provide quick feedback, so that then we can set the direction for next half, which is going to be how we scale that solution and how we improve it.
Yeah, so how does your team get deployed to kind of support these things? Is there a Reels team and then you'll kind of go in and help them?
We build a collaboration, essentially, yes. So we have joint goals, and then, we work together so this is where, as I said, people have to be invested in your solution, because if you just come in and say, hey, I have this really cool thing that I built, you should use it. Yeah, it's probably not going to work. So you have to understand what is the problem they are solving? How is the thing that you are implementing serving their goals, their top line goals? And you work together, you iterate together on this. Like, obviously we have more ownership of what we're building, but we definitely take the feedback, the input, like if they believe that something should go slightly to a different direction because they know the product better, we take that feedback in.
And so are the Facebook and the Instagram team separate?
Yeah.
Okay, so then if they have like a slightly different view of something, surely that complicates things. How do you kind of implement something that works for both platforms? We basically try to make the solution general, and then of course, the data might be different, or some of the business logic might be different, but the core solution should be something that should be somewhat generic, so that it can easily be adopted. Of course, it's not going to be the same thing necessarily, exact same thing, but we try to make it as easy to, as easy to basically, as portable, that's the word I was using, as possible, so that it can, we would need the less amount of work and time to be able to use it. It's so much more efficient to build things that are reusable across teams. Then you don't have to go and do it again and again and again. Yeah. So if that's your PriorityZero right now, what would you say is the biggest challenge you're facing in terms of driving towards that priority?
I think the biggest challenge is that it's a big company. Everybody has their own priorities. Things move fast, very fast. And it's just you just need to be constantly up to date with what's going on. Basically be in sync with people and making sure that you're aligned on priorities and on what's going on. And this can be hard, because if you take, let's say, 1 week of vacation, you can come back and things could have changed rapidly. So, it's really important to keep yourself updated on what's going on and make sure that you're aligned.
What's your approach to staying up to date? Have you got any top tips?
I think you just have to allocate time to, we have a place where we post updates, kind of like our internal Slack.
Yeah.
It can be really distracted if you're there all day.
Yes.
Or you allow notifications, but if you allocate some time to just read through what people post updates on, and having obviously regular check-ins with the teams you work on, so that you can get updated on what they are thinking and how they're planning. Make sure that maybe you are in meetings, planning meetings, so that again, you are involved. I think, especially because we have so much, there's so much information coming at you, you just need to filter through and just make time to consume what's important and what's going to be relevant to your work.
Yeah, and I think I can only imagine, but machine learning engineering sounds like it's something that requires deep focus from time to time. And obviously, those distractions are extremely distracting. You've got meetings. I'm really curious, do you time box your days, or do you try and take a whole day to focus on the heads down work? How do you even start to kind of filter out the tasks that you need to do and kind of split those two sides of the job, really?
Yeah, I have 2 days a week that are heavy, meeting heavy days.
Yeah.
And I know just I'm not going to get much done that day, probably just menial tasks.
I'm not going to get stressed about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then I try to have 3 days a week where I can really focus and just do work. Read through maybe papers that are relevant to my work, and just do just code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how much are you spending your time in person and at home?
We have a hybrid model right now, so I actually like being in the office. So for me, if I could go every day, I would. I do have a long commute, so sometimes that doesn't work out for me. But yeah, I definitely go. I try to go 3 times a week, and if my schedule allows it, I go more.
So you don't find the office more helpful for one of those types of days than the other? You would be there the whole time if you could?
If I have, yes, absolutely. I mean, I just concentrate better in the office, and I like the interaction with people. Whereas if I'm at home, I just don't get out of the house if I work from home. So, and I don't like that. But I mean, especially during the days where I have a lot of meetings, I definitely want to be in the office because it makes sense.
Yeah. So going back to your kind of PriorityZero at the moment, the work you're doing with the Reels teams, what will success look like there? You mentioned half. It feels like you're working to kind of a 6-month time horizon at the moment on this priority. Yeah. At the end of it, where do you hope to get to, and how do you know you've done a good job?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, the way it works is that we build something. We quickly evaluate it to know that we are heading towards the right direction, and then we actually test it. Like we do more tests when we have like an actual solution that's like fit for production. And once we have good, strong signals that it's actually moving top line metrics. So I should say that each team has top line goals that they try to hit each half and each years. So so basically, we try to see how our solution is contributing towards these goals, and then we run tests, obviously A/B tests, and we get signals about into how our solution is contributing there. And then once this is launched in real users, we keep track of those numbers and how this solution actually impacts in the long run, and how it has contributed to these goals. So that's how we evaluate the overall impact of the solution we build.
Nice. And then thinking about kind of the role of machine learning engineering in general, obviously we're at like a real inflection point right now with machine learning. It's become so popular. So there's so much interest in generative AI and all of the differences, all of the changes that brings. But you've been working in machine learning a long time. Has it changed that much for you? Like, has it changed as much like from the inside as it looks like it has from the outside?
Well, I've been working a lot, like during my career, I have been working a lot on recommender systems. And I think the change there is not as big as, I think like now the big boom is with Gen AI, obviously. And, it's like that specific type of model that, you have like the deep learning, and like this applies in recommender system as well. And, like the solutions you see in Gen AI applies in recommender systems too. And I think, yes, but there is a catch. It's basically, yes, there is a big boom in AI, but can the company you're working for actually support building that AI? Because like most companies, they don't have the infrastructure and they can't invest in the talent to actually build this type of model. So usually the way it works is that they use like an API from a big tech company like Google, or open source models from Meta, and they try to build upon that. But essentially, like what you're seeing is like it's the big shift towards like using more compute resources and like training those big models, which is true for recommender systems too. So I think for me, the biggest change was that going from a company like the Times to Meta, I have really seen that change in like how we use those compute resources and being able to train those big models, which if I were the New York Times, we wouldn't be able to train them. Obviously, we were operating in a much smaller scale. Yeah.
And those constraints, bring benefits in themselves, but it must feel like a kid with a whole new toy box when you can use all those resources, right?
Of course, yes, absolutely.
How much time have you had to spend explaining to people that difference between the recommendation system and the Gen AI? Because obviously there's so much external interest in this area.
Yeah. I mean, how much time? I don't know. But yeah, like, definitely, like, when they hear AI, like, people are like, oh, you know, how are you using this? How are you doing that? And, you know, it's very complex. If somebody is not really, like, working in machine learning, they don't really know the nitty-gritty details and how things work. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's not like, you know, the model architecture or, like, the way we train models is not necessarily, I mean, the model we developed was, like, has also billions of parameters. Like, so, you know, it's a recommender model. So it's not that big of a difference. But yeah, obviously, like, when you see, like, a model really, like, you know, like a chat box responding to you, it's much more impressive than when you're consuming a feed and you just get good recommendations.
So at one of our recent conferences, we had Evan Morikawa, who works at OpenAI, talking about kind of all the challenges they faced in growing, in kind of serving the explosive interest in that application in ChatGPT. And he talked about a lot of the same things as you. It's just like the resource intensiveness of it is something that I don't think a lot of people recognize. And, you know, he was just talking about, when I asked him what's the biggest challenge you faced here, it was just GPUs. It was literally just compute capacity. And so I think that, yeah, what you were saying about working at Meta, it just gives you kind of all these toys to play with. But we're talking about PriorityZero here. So how do you kind of zero in on using those resources for the most impactful thing?
Yeah, and we do have limitations in, like, it's not like I have, like, you know, countless GPUs I could use to train. Like, obviously we have certain quota that we can use as a team. So we have to make choices. And I think it's just like about understanding, okay, I have, you know, I need to run an experiment, for example. I need to train, like, X number of models. Which models actually seem to be the most promising. And this is where a good offline evaluation tool, you know, we build a lot of those internally at Meta, like, comes into play, because it can give you that quick feedback about, okay, this is better than this one. So, you know, you don't have to test 10 models, you can test 2, you can narrow down your options, and then you can make smart decisions into, like, how you use your resources more effectively.
Yeah, great. And how much time do you spend kind of split between kind of making sure the model is doing what you want it to do for the business, but then also tweaking it to make it kind of more cost effective or more performant? Is that a different function, or do you kind of have to work on both those problems?
I mean, I don't work so much on the infra part, so I'm not so much concerned about, you know, how we serve the model, how we scale the model. Like, this is the work of a different team. But I definitely, you know, when we train a model and it becomes, like, let's say we use, like, many features, becomes very big, very large, then it costs more to serve in production. And the problem with that is that it's not necessarily that I can't really, you know, I have to make a case basically for, you know, using that model. If, like, I'm going to use that model, it has to also prove that it has, like, that much impact in order to, you know, make up for the cost. So you have to understand the trade-off and basically then make a safe bet, because, yeah, if I launch something that's really expensive and it brings, like, little value, it doesn't make sense to keep it in production. So.
Okay, and then my last question is really just kind of looking into the future a little bit. Obviously, recommendation engines have been around for a while. They've improved greatly, but there's just a bigger amount of content and way more platforms where they're serving people's needs. From a product perspective, where do you see recommendations and the machine learning behind it traveling? Do you think that there's a big leap coming there, or do you think it's just that kind of constant iteration that you've been going through for the last few years?
I mean, obviously, recommendations is all about, like, data, and, you know, the more data you combine, the better product you're going to have, the more nuanced product you're going to have. I'm not, I mean, I can only give you my personal opinion. It's not, like, anything that I know. It's definitely not something that I know that related to Meta, yes, just to be clear. But my personal opinion, like, seeing also, you know, all of the progress with chatbots and Gen AI, I expect that we're going to see a lot more of that. To basically, we're going to see chatbots develop memories and basically start being, like, actually having personalized responses to you when you interact with them. them. So yeah, I think this is going to be really cool. I'm looking forward to that. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop seeing, we're going to stop having personalized feeds or apps. I think this will stay, but I think it's going to, personalization will start being more interactive, rather than passively consuming content that's catered to you.
I think one behavior that I've kind of noticed in some of my friends recently that I think is really interesting from this perspective is like the kind of greater transparency that people kind of have of recommendation engines. I think in the past you would just kind of talk about your Netflix algorithm or your Spotify algorithm or your Facebook algorithm, and you could maybe like do some things that you thought would have an impact on how that might work in the future, but you didn't really know how that might happen. I think in the future, the way I'm hearing people talk about how they like work with these platforms is that they're going to do a little bit more interaction there, where it's like they get a recommendation and they say, actually, that's not really what I was looking for. I'm looking more for something like this, or I really enjoyed this. I'd like something kind of similar. At the moment, I think people do that kind of passively, but it feels like it might switch to more active. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's going to be not so much about like giving feedback like I'm interested or not interested or hide. It's going to be more about, no, that's not right, like typing it to the bot or like saying it to the app. And this is what I would like. And then the bot would then translate that and give you what you actually want, what you're looking for.
Perfect. All right. That is all I've got for you. But this is actually great for this show because I always like to end on a recommendation. Any recommendation, you're the perfect person. So is there anything you've been reading recently, anything you've seen, anything you've done or bought that you would recommend to the rest of the audience?
Yeah, I actually read a book called Chip War by Chris Miller. I think it got published in 2022, so it's pretty recent. And it talks about high-speed processors, which is like very much into play now with Gen AI. So, related to what we were discussing about the compute resources that we need. And, it discusses how different countries have actually invested in, processors and how this plays into geopolitical games as well. And I'm really interested in this subject because I think it's going to define, essentially it's going to be the new oil of the, of our century. And it's like, it's a very powerful resource, and it's going to determine who's going to have the power to train those models and we don't know how this is going to influence our world, but it's an interesting read. I would recommend it. Yeah.
That's an awesome recommendation. I love that. Katerina, thank you so much for joining us on this. It was lovely talking to you. I will speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for listening to PriorityZero, a lead dev podcast. Remember, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify. But when you do, please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And we hope to see you at the next one.